Okay, let's talk about early periods. I want to do one of these for most of the different types of menstrual irregularities, menstrual disorders, but I wanted to start with early periods. My name is Kira. I am a licensed acupuncturist in Los Angeles. I have my own practice, and then I also work at a practice in Pasadena. So let's start with early periods. Most of this is going to be from the Chinese medicine Eastern perspective, but I did want to start with the definition of early periods, which is probably more of a Western definition. So it's a period that comes consistently up to 9 days early, so that the cycle is less than 28 days long. Usually you want to see this in a pattern, so 2, 3, 4, 5 months of this, and then we can kind of tack on the quote-unquote early period problem. Everyone does have their own cycle that's quote-unquote normal for them, but if we start to see changes, that's what we identify as pathological. It's more a change from your norm rather than whatever your norm is. So we do want to see this for at least a couple months to identify it as an early period. The amount of bleeding can either just be normal, what it is for you, it could be less than what's normal for you, or it could be excessive. The definition of an early period has less to do with the amount of blood and more to do with the timing. So let's talk high level about the cause. From a TCM perspective, it's going to be pretty broad, but we can go into more detail later on. This is just high level things to be thinking about if you are having early periods. So excessive physical work, irregular diet, overwork, and also just aging. These would be more deficient types of patterns. And even from a Western perspective, any Western doctor would probably also tell you, like, okay, well, look at your diet, look at your stress, look at your age, whatever. And those are first and foremost things that we want to high level be asking questions about at least. And then we can differentiate from there. For more excessive types of patterns or excessive types of pathologies, you can also look at someone's diet, and that could be causing more of an excessive pattern. So if someone consumes a lot of spicy foods, alcohol, greasy foods, that can actually be causing a heat in the body that we'll talk about later. Also, emotional stress. This one is kind of the first and foremost one that I start out with when I'm thinking about any type of menstrual disorder. I know for myself, side note, I got my keys and my wallet stolen a couple years ago, and I remember I was home and we changed the locks and everything like that, but I had fallen asleep and I was home alone, and I heard, I woke up to rattling at the door. And even though we had changed the locks, I didn't know if someone, had other means of getting in anyway. I thought it was the people who stole my keys. And waking up from a sleep and thinking that someone's going to come into your space and God knows, what they want to do was so stressful for me that I remember my entire body just sank. My heart sank. The adrenaline kick was out of control. And I remember that month I did not get a period. And that was the only event that I can think of that month where I was like, oh, okay, this is very stressful, and I could see this affecting other parts of my life after this because it was so shocking to my system. So I think with emotional stress, I like to put an emphasis on this one, especially with patients, because I think sometimes it doesn't have to be, that shocking of an event for your body to take it as an assault. So I like to probe and ask questions that we can maybe get to, other things that would have caused stress. And if we can't pinpoint specific things that may have caused excessive stress, just looking to see, is this person chronically stressed? And why? When did it start? Has it been forever, or has it been more recently? And just asking those questions and getting that person back into their body so that we can decide, okay, is stress playing a role here? So that's just something to think about. That's one of my keys with periods overall. We talked about overwork, also sometimes chronic illness. So if you have other things going on, that can 100% affect your menstrual cycle. And then Chinese medicine always likes to put this thing in there with too many children. Like if someone bears too many children, it can affect your kidney essence or your kidney yin, your liver and kidney yin. So I always just mention that, but I feel like that's more of a thing if you never took the time to properly heal and tonify after having kids. I don't know how much the number matters. Most of us are not having like 14 kids. If you are, I would say yes, that's excessive. But, 2, 3, 4, it's more about what you're doing postpartum to heal your body and less about the number for most people, I would say. So, yeah, this is high level. That's stuff that your gyno would probably also want to talk about. And it's just things for you to keep in mind. So if you've been having early periods and you're like, I don't even know where to start, like what could be causing it, I would look into diet. I would look into stress. I would look into any event that was abnormal for you around the time. You can even look months ago. The body will sometimes delay the effects of, whatever event it is. And yeah, that's that. So for pathology, there really are two avenues that you want to look at or be thinking about when you have early periods or when someone you're working with has early periods. So the first one would be qi deficiency, and that's just an overall energy deficiency. So you want to be looking at the spleen and kidneys in this case. Is it more the spleen qi deficiency, or is it more of a kidney, more severe, more chronic? Then the other avenue could be blood heat. So overall heat in the body. This could be deficient heat, or it could be excess heat. And we're going to go into some patterns now that kind of break that down even further. Okay, so spleen qi deficiency, this is, some would say overdiagnosed, some would say, well, everyone has it, so it should be diagnosed. I don't really have a strong opinion on that, but I will say most people that I see could probably fall under spleen qi deficiency, and then they always usually have some other pattern too, but yeah, I would say a lot of people have spleen qi deficiency, so it might be good to look at first and foremost kind of like the emotion piece of irregular periods, kind of thinking about, okay, what did I go through recently? Have I been more stressed? What happened? Blah, blah, blah. I think spleen qi deficiency might be a good place to start. Some of the symptoms that you might see with spleen qi deficiency patterns are paler and more dilute menstrual blood. This person might have digestive issues. So let's say bloating after eating, loose stools, tiredness. And then if you look at their tongue, it would be more on the paler side, like pale pink. It might be a little puffy. There might be teeth marks. And then their pulse would be more on the weaker side. An interesting note with spleen Qi deficiency is that this person might see an increase in blood flow initially. So for a couple months, let's say they get an early period, but they actually have more excessive bleeding. And it can be confusing because you're like, okay, well, I got an early period and now I'm bleeding more. So shouldn't that be an excessive, pattern? Like, why would I be spleen deficient? And yes, that's true. So it is good to differentiate for sure. We have to look at the whole picture, but it is possible to have increased blood flow with spleen Qi deficiency. So in Chinese medicine, they think of this spleen as holding. It holds energetically things in place within the body. And one thing that it does is holds the blood. So we say if someone is spleen Qi deficient, then they are unable to hold the blood within the vessels, and it may become more leaky. And so you might actually see an increase in blood flow, menstruation-wise, for these people initially. And then what happens sometimes is that they have this increase in flow for however many months, and then that actually depletes them further. So now they're more deficient on top of already being deficient. And now the blood flow will slowly decrease. And it might even go to no blood flow. I'm saying period-wise, not blood flow within the body. But you might have a really heavy period for a month or two, maybe even more than that. And then you might notice, okay, now I have like my period is much lighter. And now, this next month I actually have no period. So it can be confusing, and it all really just stems from this spleen Qi deficiency. So there are a couple of different herbal formulations that we might use. I don't necessarily want to go over all of them because I think it's easy for people to hear, oh, that sounds like me. Like, I have pale blood and bloating. So maybe I should try one of these formulas, because that's not really how it works, although we try to make it that easy. And I'm not saying it has to be much harder than that, but I am someone who thinks at least go to an acupuncturist or do telehealth. Like, I do telehealth appointments for herbal consults specifically. But having someone who has herbal knowledge and background, and not only that, but can probe and ask questions for your entire history, in my opinion, is so, 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 so important. And it's not just because I am a practitioner. It is also because I've been on the other side of it, and I know what it's like to just be throwing darts at nothing. And nothing sticks, nothing works. So it's just so much easier to do it right the first time. And even if we have to adjust here and there, whatever it is, it's still so much easier to at least start from a knowledgeable place and a place with a good foundation. And then you can, trial and error on top of that foundation. But if you're trialing and erroring on top of no foundation, then good luck. You might get lucky, something might work, but it probably will be harder. So I just want to put out maybe a few points, and I'll do like the most common herbal formula for each of these, maybe just as a foundation of knowledge, but there are so many different patterns and different ways that all of these patterns can interact with each other. And you might have to remove or add herbs or look at different formulations entirely to get that perfect result or close to perfect result. So overall, for spleen qi deficiency, you want to strengthen the spleen from a Chinese medicine perspective. And again, let's put on our Eastern medicine cap for these terms. When I'm saying these, it is hard if you don't have Chinese medicine background, but try to slip into more of a intuitive space and use these things as kind of a high level for your knowledge, understanding of what your acupuncturist or other practitioner is trying to accomplish. So we want to strengthen the spleen, we want to tonify and raise the qi, and we want to consolidate the changmai, which is a vessel that runs in the middle of the body and flows through the uterus, and we also want to contain the blood. So the herbal formula that you'll most commonly hear at kind of the base of spleen qi deficiency is Sejunzitang. This is literally just for quote-unquote spleen qi deficiency, and then you can add herbs from there for all the other symptoms and patterns that can be on top of spleen qi deficiency. But that is first and foremost where people will start when they see someone with spleen qi deficiency. Okay, next we're moving on to what I guess you can think of as a more severe qi deficiency. So I'm using, for my reference for this, I'm using Machiocha, the gyno book by him, and he calls it kidney qi not firm. But you can just think of it as a kidney qi deficiency. So for this, you might also see that pale and diluted blood. The blood might be stringy in this case, maybe mucousy. This person might have the tried and true lower back aches or pain. They might also have a lot of urination at night. They might feel more cold. They might be more dizzy. They might have a low-pitched tinnitus. The tongue will also be pale, maybe puffy or swollen. And then the pulse will be weak as well. Same with spleen qi deficiency, but it might be a little bit deeper in this case. And then that third position pulse might be even more hidden or deficient. So again here, you can have an increase in flow, and it also might be a little bit darker if you have yang deficiency with the kidney qi deficiency. So on the spectrum of kidney qi deficiency, the next stop on that spectrum would be kidney yang deficiency. So the blood, if you're moving into that direction, might be darker due to this general cold in the body, or this cold from yang deficiency within the body. So that might be one way to differentiate between the kidney qi deficiency and the spleen qi deficiency, because usually with the spleen qi deficiency, the blood will be just a little bit paler, although in kidney qi deficiency, you can also have pale blood. But if you are moving into a more severe kidney qi deficiency, also moving into yang deficiency, you might be able to see a darker color. Here you want to strengthen the kidneys, you want to tonify the qi, you want to warm yang, just so you're kind of preventing that first and foremost from happening so that you're not moving further along on that spectrum. And then you also want to consolidate the ren and the chang. For points, I didn't go over any for spleen qi deficiency, but for both of these, I want to point out a few that I think could work for both. So spleen 6 could work for both. Anything on the ren, so ren 6 for sure, maybe a ren 4, do 20 could also work. For spleen qi deficiency, you might want to throw in a ren 12, a stomach 36, spleen 4 PC6, and then for kidney qi not firm, you might want to throw in a lung 7, kidney 6 combination. If you want to do back points, you could do bladder 23, kidney 3, yeah. Those are some good ones. Machiocha writes about ren 4 and kidney 13 used together to consolidate the ren and the chang. So if, when I said consolidate the ren and the chang, that's like, what is that? What are we doing? So maybe you could just throw in a ren 4 and a kidney 13 together, and that can help consolidate the ren and the chang and also strengthen the uterus. For those who don't know where these points are, those are both on the abdomen, so they are near the uterus. So, yes. In terms of kidney qi not firm, the base formula you could think of would be Jingui Shenqi Wan. This tonifies and warms kidney yang, and you can think of it as a formula for kidney qi deficiency with some cold. So, yes, that's the basics of that. Now we can move on to the heat patterns. So, like I said, for pathology, we had the qi deficiency and we have the blood heat. We did the qi deficiency both from the spleen and the kidney perspective, and now we can move on to blood heat, whether it's excess heat or it's deficient heat. And I'll explain what deficient heat means because I can imagine that sounds a little confusing. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the liver. So there are two patterns here that this book talks about, but they're pretty similar to the naked eye, so I'm going to talk about them together. They're both considered excessive patterns. So we have liver blood heat and stagnant liver qi turning into fire with blood heat. So some of the signs and symptoms that you may see are, again, we have that early period, but in this case, the blood flow is usually heavy to very heavy, and the blood color is bright red, or it can also maybe go into dark red, but you might also have bright red blood and then bigger, more dark clots. The clots usually are big in this case, and you can think of blood clots as sort of a spectrum as well. So the smaller they are, you can think of that as more deficient, and the larger they are, you can think of it as more excess. But, nothing is definite within Chinese medicine, but it can be easier to think of it that way. This person might have anxiety, mental restlessness, they might have excessive thirst, they might have dark urine, they might be predisposed to have more PMS symptoms than the average person, with breast tenderness, maybe they have a bitter taste in their mouth, maybe they have constipation or a dry throat, maybe they have a red face. Those are some things to look out for. You want to see a red tongue. It might have redder sides. It might not. There might be a yellow coat. There might not. The pulse is definitely going to be rapid. In some cases, it can be wiry. So I don't know. I guess to most people, wiry would just feel like a normal pulse, but it would be more rapid, and it might actually be what's called overflowing. So it feels like an excess pulse, and it's kind of something that you just feel rather than, it makes sense when you say it, but it's just something you can feel. You're like, oh, okay, this feels excess, if that makes sense. In this case, we want to clear the heat, cool the blood, regulate the period. We might also want to pacify the liver and move qi. The liver is the organ in Chinese medicine that is usually connected to anger and resentment. And if those feelings are held in for a long time, you might stagnate this liver qi. And if you're stagnating this qi, it has the ability to turn into heat within the body. And what I find funny about liver patterns specifically is that they are so obviously seen in modern day that it's like one of those things that's so crazy to me that this stuff was thought of thousands of years ago, but you can quite literally see it in someone's face if they are an alcoholic or if they are chronically angry, if they hold a lot of resentment. They usually have a redder face. They might have redder eyes. They might have some of those like little capillary breaks in their face. They're usually irritable. Obviously, if you're angry, you're irritable, right? They usually are prone to more of an anxious feeling. They might be thirsty more often. They might have constipation. They might have some weight around their midsection. When I think about like a liver heat pattern, though, I just picture someone with a red face. And then I think of mostly men that I've seen that have this pattern, at least, first and foremost, and then probably a few others. But they always have those little capillary breaks on their face. And it's just so funny to me because it's so specific in Chinese medicine, like what it is. And usually the things that they're doing in their lifestyle goes along with the pathology of a liver pattern. So yeah, that's just a side note. But anyway, those are some of the signs and symptoms. That's what you want to do. You want to clear the heat, cool the blood, regulate the periods, move the qi, and pacify the liver. In terms of points, we can also use maybe a lung 7, kidney 6 combo. Definitely want to use a liver 2, a liver 3. We can also use maybe a kidney 2. Spleen 6 would be good. Maybe even LI11 or an LI4. Spleen 10 might work as well. So those are some things to keep in mind. In terms of formulas, okay, well, we can do the tried and true of Jiawei Xiaoyaosan, which moves the qi, it quote-unquote pacifies the liver, it clears liver fire, especially when it's coming from a liver qi stagnation first and foremost. And then if there is more damp seen, so if this person maybe has itchiness in the genital area, And they also have some sticky or yellow discharge, like vaginal discharge, maybe even like a leathery smelling discharge or a foul smelling discharge with that itchiness, then we can look to Long Don Shagon Tong, and that's one that clears damp heat in the lower jiao. Okay, let's move on to the heart. And this is also a excess pattern, but it's heart fire instead of liver. So in this one, again, we're going to have a heavier period. We might have that mental restlessness or irritability. They could also have a red face and thirst for this one. But the difference here is that you're going to see palpitations and usually insomnia. So palpitations doesn't have to be the Western term of palpitations. It can be, but it really is more that this person can feel their heart beating. And if you have ever been in a stressful period of time, you might be sitting down and thinking that you're resting, but you can feel your heart beating in your chest. It's not necessarily excessively rapid or you're, afraid that you're having a heart attack or anything. It's not that extreme. It's more that you just feel restless and you can physically feel your heart beating in your chest. And that's kind of what they're talking about here with palpitations. So I would say between heart fire and liver fire, you're looking at the palpitations and the insomnia as differentiators, although, technically, sure, you could have them with liver fire too, but from a TCM perspective, you'll usually associate those more with the heart. And in this case, the tongue again is going to be red, but it will have a redder tip of the tongue, and that's something to note as well. And then the pulse is similar, where it's rapid, and then it can also be that surging feeling of an excessive pulse. So here you want to drain fire, you want to clear the heart, and you want to calm the mind. So some points that would be good, especially on the heart channel, would be heart 8, and could probably do heart 7 as well. Also pericardium 7. And then Machiucha writes about Ren 4. He's saying it directs the treatment to the uterus, so that's interesting. And then also kidney 16, which harmonizes the connection of the heart and the kidney with the uterus. So that's also something. Here, there's a formula that's mentioned, but it's not super common. So I guess I can just say it, but it's Qing Qin Pingantong, and it's called Clearing the Heart and Balancing the Liver Decoction. I like some of the herbs that are in it, so if I could find it, that does sound good, but I would probably mix a couple other formulas to help with this heart heat. And this is what I mean when I say that it's not one and done. Like it's hard to look up a formula and just be like, oh, perfect, that's me. Like I have heavy periods and I'm angry all the time, so I must need this formula. There's so many different avenues that you could take to hopefully get to the same place. So that is one formula that's mentioned, but I could think of a few more that you can kind of modify to also get to the same or a better place. And then finally, we're going to go into a deficient heat pattern. So in this case, it would be a liver and kidney yin deficiency, which leads to an empty heat. So what does that mean? I like to describe this pattern in terms of menopause because I think it's easiest from a Western thinking mind to understand when you think about someone who's going through menopause or is postmenopausal. So if you think about it that way, the yin of the body would be encompassing everything that we think about in terms of blood, hormones, everything within the blood, etc. So you are postmenopausal, you are deficient in hormones, especially for conceiving in your reproductive organs. So estrogen, let's say. When that happens, there is a phenomenon in Chinese medicine that says if you're yin deficient, over time, it can create empty heat. So from this deficiency, there brews a heat in the body. I also like to think of this in terms of blood deficiency. So you can think about it as your vessels are, let's say, this is just to think about it, right? But your vessels are, let's say, less full with blood because you're blood deficient. That space can create heat. And that heat over time can create other problems. So this can also be connected to qi deficiency that we were talking about before with the spleen and the kidney. And we said that the spleen holds in the blood, and if you're deficient in the spleen qi, then that can cause excessive bleeding for a little while. And if you think about it, you have that qi deficiency, which leads to excessive bleeding, and then that excessive bleeding leads to a yin deficiency, because the yin is the let's say the liquid of the body. It's the moistening of the body, right? So if you're excessively bleeding, you are blood deficient and therefore yin deficient. Yin is the umbrella term for it. So now that you're yin deficient, you can more easily create heat within the body. And again, this is something we see in menopause, where this person that is postmenopausal may feel dry. They may have vaginal dryness. They might have dryness in other areas of the body. They might have those hot flashes. They may just run a little warmer than usual. And there's so many other signs and symptoms to menopause. But when we're thinking about empty heat, try to think about it in that way, where deficient heat is more on the menopausal side of things. It doesn't have to be in that lens. Someone who's in their 20s can have deficient heat in their body, but just to understand it versus an excessive heat. Because we can all think of, let's say, an angry alcoholic and think about how that makes sense, that that's excessive heat. Whereas deficient heat, I think, is a little bit harder to understand. But hopefully in the frame of menopause, it kind of makes sense. So in this case, again, we have those early periods, but they may be scanty or they may be heavy. It's not as cut and dry. Usually this person, instead of having an overall red face, they may just have that little red area on their face that's just the cheeks and the bridge of the nose. This is also seen in someone with lupus, so you can picture that face. I'm not saying that, lupus equals this pattern or this pattern equals lupus at all. I'm not saying that, although maybe it could, but it's not that. It's not from an autoimmune process, but just picturing that face flushing in your head. So it's really just the cheeks that are red and maybe the nose, but it's not your whole face that's bright red. You might have a feeling of heat and feeling more hot toward the nighttime. You might be kicking off covers. You might feel like you're overall temperature is fine throughout the day, but then when you go to get in bed, now you're hot, and throughout the night you just get hotter and hotter. You might even have night sweating. This person can also have that low-pitched tinnitus or dizziness. They might also have what's called 5-palm heat or 5-center heat. So their hands, their feet, and their chest are really warm, and that's where they feel their heat the most. And their tongue will, again, be red because it is heat, but the difference is that there's not going to be a coating on it. And it can look almost like a shiny coat, but it's not white or yellow or any specific color. It's just a shininess to the tongue, but the tongue overall is red. And then that pulse can either be felt superficially, so if you barely put your fingers on someone's pulse, you can feel it. And then it can also be a little bit more deficient or really thin feeling. So in this case, we want to nourish the yin. We want to clear that deficient heat, and then we also want to regulate the periods. I also want to note here that you might have small clots, and again, this is an empty pattern, right? So that's why we see small versus large clots. The blood might be red to start out with, and it might get darker and darker as time goes on. So that's why I like to tell patients to log, not only the cycle length, but the color of the blood and for how many days, because it is interesting to see how the color of the blood might change over time. And in this case, you might see it go from red to darker red over a few months. So for this one, we can look at lung 7, kidney 6 again, Ren 4, kidney 3, spleen 6, liver, kidney 2, and then also a liver 8, which is great for anything having to do with blood. Same thing with spleen 10. And then in terms of formulas, the base for anything liver and kidney would be, especially, yin deficiency, would be Lu Wei Di Huang Wan or Di Huang Tong. So this is for just the package of liver and kidney yin deficiency. In this case, this person would have more heat signs from that deficient heat. So then we can add in Zhimu and Huang Bai. So Zhi Bai Di Huang Tong. So this can clear that deficient heat or fire. And those are kind of the go-tos, but again, there are a few others. All right, and then just some key takeaways here. Again, with any menstrual irregularity, anything having to do with the reproductive system, you always want to buckle in for at least a few months, if not years. This is something that it can take a while. It does not have to. It can, though. So it's just better to set that expectation up front. It could work within 2 weeks. It could work within a month, or it might take multiple cycles. It depends if you were on birth control, if you have where your genes come from, how is happening in your family, your lifestyle, your stress levels, any other conditions that you may have, any hormonal imbalances. There's so many factors that go into this. The thyroid is also something that I see all the time as the key culprit in terms of hormonal imbalances or just menstrual irregularities. And it actually has nothing to do with, your specific reproductive organs. It is a bigger umbrella of problems coming from the thyroid. But anyway, I digress. We want to, at least for a minimum of 3 cycles, see where we're at. So I would say buckle in for 3 cycles and we can go from there. Usually the empty heat, so the deficient heat patterns that we just spoke about, may take a few more months to resolve because usually that is a more chronic state of being. With a spleen qi deficiency, that is not as severe. It can be, but it usually is not. So we're kind of going on a spectrum here again, and that deficient heat might take a little bit longer than the rest of these to resolve. If you are in the deficient camp of things, then you definitely want to make sure you are prioritizing rest and you are finding exercise that does not deplete you. If you feel tired after you work out, that is not working for you. So it's okay to be sore, but if you feel depleted, like you just want to lay down for the rest of the day after working out, I would look for something else or modify what you're currently doing, especially if you're already a deficient person. That's just making it worse, even though you're trying to do something good for your body. I would also avoid, well, this one's the annoying one because you hear this from all the acupuncturists, especially in LA. It's like, no smoothies, no salads. And listen, I don't drink smoothies anymore, mostly because I don't have a good blender here, but I do eat salads, and I will continue to eat salads because I like them. I don't eat them every day, but if I'm out or if I want to get sweet green, like, I'm getting it. So take this with a grain of salt, but you want to avoid as much as possible cold and raw foods. Yeah. I would try it out in terms of liquids first. I think you might see the most change if you cut back on iced drinks and really cold water. And then you can kind of play around with it from there. If you start to feel better with doing room temp or warm, then we can move to foods. And then in terms of the excessive heat patterns, obviously, if you're drinking in excess, that's alcohol. I'm talking about drinking, probably not the greatest. We all do it from time to time, and that's fine. But if you are a indulger in alcohol multiple times a week and it's excessive, that is first and foremost what we want to focus on. Also, if you can avoid eating hot and spicy foods, also greasy foods for a time being, and see if that alleviates any of the symptoms, that would be great. There are some cultures where the food is just spicier and comes with a lot of like animal fat, and I noticed that there are patterns in people who, have eaten this way for their whole lives, and the food is incredible and amazing. So, like, why would you want to not eat that food? But just to see if it can help cut down on symptoms, it is good to avoid every meal being excessively spicy, excessively fatty in terms of animal fats, and to see if that helps, because that's an easier fix than other things. So that's one little tip, although it might be obvious. And then for the deficient heat patterns with some yin deficiency, you definitely want to make sure that you have adequate rest. And Chinese medicine actually suggests taking a short break after lunch, which is interesting and probably a great thing if you want to use it as an excuse. You can say, oh, I've been prescribed a short rest after lunch. Like, it is what it is. I'm just trying to heal. So that could be a good way to get out of doing stuff that you don't want to do. Also, avoiding working for 12 hours straight. That's not great for anyone, but especially if you are already deficient, we don't want to be doing that, especially if your work is staring at a screen and you're just staring a foot or two in front of you for multiple hours a day. That is not great, and we want to avoid that. And yeah, I mean, you can't avoid it every day, but as much as you can would be great, at least for a period of time, to rest the body and rest the eyes. Also, I always say I personally hike for my exercise, and I use that as my eye stretching time and my eye relaxation time. So I will look as far ahead as possible into the distance of Los Angeles to try to relax my eyes, because I am looking at a screen for a lot of my day. And even when I'm needling people, I am really close to them. So my distance for how far I'm looking is quite short for most of the day. And I would say it's like that for a lot of people. So when you're driving, if you can't get outside otherwise, definitely try to look into the distance and relax your eyes a little bit. And then also a tip is to never reach the point of ultimate exhaustion when you're doing things. If you have this deficient state of being, try not to push yourself to the point of no return with activities. So again, that has to do with working, and it also can have to do with working out. Try not to overdo it to where you're out of commission for a couple of days and you can't stay consistent with things. So that is everything for early periods. If there are any questions or anything, I would love to have a little chat. And you can find me at my Substack, like I said, and that has all my links in it. My Instagram is my full name, so Kira, and then there's a D in the middle, and then it's Lane. And I do both in-home appointments in Los Angeles, and then I also do telehealth for everyone across the U.S., and that's for herbal consults. So yeah, that is it. I will hopefully do one of these for all the other common menstrual disorder types in the future. And thanks for listening.